Hello and welcome. My name is Paul Higgins. I'm the co-founder and CTO of Crowd Valley, and I will be hosting this webinar, which is about Crowd Valley starter applications. So how to use the developer tools and applications that we have set up to allow you to build a digital finance platform on top of the Crowd Valley framework and API as quickly as possible. We'll go through the following contents. So I'll briefly introduce the main topic of the webinar and just explain who we envisage would be the audience for this webinar. I'll just touch on a little bit about Crowd Valley as a company and more to explain what kind of products and platforms can be built on top of our API than anything else. And then the majority of the session will be going through step by step in quite a bit of detail how to set up your own digital finance platform as quickly as possible. So how to find the code, how to set up your own account, how to sign up for credentials, and how to go from really sort of starting from scratch to having a basic functional platform that allows you to at least log in and sign up and do a few other things. And it'll also show you how to connect to your admin portal and kind of interact with the data that you find there. At the end, we'll have a couple of pages just going through links and other resources that you might find useful, especially if you're working with the Crowd Valley framework for the first time. And then there'll be a bit of time for questions at the end, I imagine. So if you do have any questions, please write them into the chat box, which you should see in the GoToWebinar application, which is probably at the top right of your corner as you're watching this. So the purpose of this webinar is to explain how you can set up and run your own online finance platform, digital finance platform, on top of our infrastructure and framework, and how to kind of go from this very starting point where you sign up to having the basic platform up and running on your local machine. So this is for primarily developers or perhaps technical project managers who are planning to build either a kind of initial proof of concept or you might call a minimum viable product type platform for demo purposes. It's especially designed for developers who haven't worked with the Crowd Valley API and framework before. So the kinds of platforms that we mean by digital finance, online finance, are platforms like crowdfunding marketplaces or peer-to-peer lending marketplaces, real estate marketplaces where you can lend or purchase for real estate projects, or in fact any kind of asset class which could be bought or lent against online. If you go to our website, you'll see many examples of those kinds of platforms. This is the kind of audience that we envisage, but of course you may be more on the business side and just interested to see kind of what the process looks like for working with Crowd Valley as one way of approaching this kind of project. So if you are in that category, then of course feel free to stay with us and ask any questions that come to mind as we go through. We're not going to get into much detail about actual code level operations, and we're not going to look in detail at the API structure or any particular functions of the API. In fact, there are other webinars that cover those topics that are available on our site. So it's more going to be a step-by-step guide about which pages and which resources online you should be going to if you want to use one of these starter applications. And the starter application itself is basically a kind of ready-made version of a very, very basic online funding platform, which has already been hooked up to the CrowdValley API through our developer tools. And I'll show you an example of what that looks like in a few minutes. So briefly about CrowdValley, and this is the only page I'll spend on this, but we've been going since 2012, and in fact have worked together in this market since 2009. And we have built the CrowdValley API really to enable a new generation of online finance platforms or financial services in general. And our customers are operators of various types of marketplace platform, managing private securities predominantly, either in equity-based or debt-based kinds of deals, or some combination of the two. And that encompasses crowdfunding, peer-to-peer lending, private placements, broker-dealer kind of accounts, and of all different types of asset classes. So there's a lot more information about CrowdValley at our website, as you'd imagine. So if you're interested in things like case studies and other examples and kind of product descriptions, then please have a look at that. So in terms of where the starter applications kind of lie in our overall product, you can think of our framework or our architecture in this kind of way. So all of the customer platforms that operate on top of the CrowdValley APIs and infrastructure are kind of represented in the top left by various web user interfaces or mobile user interfaces, or whichever you may want to do, which use CrowdValley public APIs. And then we also provide an admin user platform, which is represented in the top right, which uses admin APIs or private APIs. And so today we're looking at the process of setting up one web end user front end, so one user-facing platform, and we'll go through the way that you can do that by using the various tools that we've set up. So let's get straight into the process. The process then will go through signing up for credentials, downloading and installing the codes that you would need the actual application program to use as your starter application. It will explain how to add your own credentials to your own version of this application, and then I'll just briefly show you how you can then adjust the code and see how to kind of start building your own version. So it's a pretty common way of getting started. Some developers like to just kind of start from scratch and start building their own applications using either our SDKs or putting their own kind of code wrappers together, and that's a perfectly reasonable way of approaching this as well. So this is a kind of easy way to get something started quickly, and we'll just go through the steps now. So the first thing that you'd want to do as a developer is you'd go to our website and you'd go to the box at the top that says developer sign up, and you'll get to this link, crowdvalley.com/sign up. So you'll see this page which says sign up for free developer environment access, and you would enter your details there. So as an example, you would enter your name as John Doe, and then your email, password, confirm the password, and then enter an application name. So the first four should be relatively easy. The application name is really nothing more than an identifier for your application or for yourself as a developer. So it can be the name of the platform, or it can be any kind of any kind of string, any kind of message that means something to you. It's not going to be visible to your end users in any way. It's just a reference for your platform, for your database and your account on top of our framework. So the account name, the application name, must be unique amongst the other applications that are already registered with us. So if you try to register with an application name that happens to be taken by somebody else already, then it will say that you're not allowed to do that and please choose another one. But that's the only constraint really on application name. But you can choose something that makes sense for you. So you put those information into the boxes and agree to the terms of service, and then press sign up. And then you'll see a page that looks a bit like this, saying your initial credentials have been set up, and there's a couple of things you can do next. So the first thing that you can do is you can log into your digital back office, which is the admin portal, the admin application for your new platform. And you can see the link there, which is backoffice.sandbox.crowdvalley.com. So you can do that straight away. You can go to that link and use the email and password that you just entered, and you'll be able to see an admin portal which is already up and running for you, and I'll in fact show you what that looks like in a minute. It also gives you the credentials for using our API as well. So there are 3 parts to the platform level credentials, which are the network name, which is actually the same as the application name. So if I just skip back, you would see that if you put in John Funder there, it will turn that into kind of smaller text, and it will show. It will also strip out any spaces or gaps, and then it will also generate an API key and an API secret, and these are credentials to be used by the developers of your site. And then it also gives you a link to the Crowd Valley GitHub page as well, and I'll show you what you can find there in a couple of minutes. But the GitHub page shows code repositories for all of our starter applications, also our SDKs, our software development kits, and also some other tools and kind of guides that you can use when building your platform. So as a next step, one thing that you can do is go straight to your admin application. If you go to the link backoffice.sandbox.crowdvalley.com, then you will see a page with a sign-in box, and then you can simply click in by entering your email and your password and press login. Since it's the first time you would have done that, it will show you a pop-up saying please agree to the terms and conditions, and you can click into those links to see the terms and conditions on our website. If you press tick to confirm, then you'll end up at this page, which is the dashboard page for your platform. So this is the admin backend, if you like. It's the place where admin users will come and monitor the operations on your platform. So the first thing that you can see is that based on your activity so far, you've got 1 user, and you've got an activity timeline which just so far shows the fact that you as the new user have accepted the admin terms of service. And when you start interacting with your own front end and and the API as well, then you will see a record of various kind of relevant activities that gradually populates that activity timeline. And the one user is evidently the user that you created, that you signed up with, who is also the first admin user. So you can also get hold of your API keys as well. So if you didn't write them down when you signed up from the previous page, then you can always go into the account section of this application, and you can see the API keys will be listed there. So your API key and API secrets are written down there. And then the other part, the network name, is actually the last element of the URL in the link that you go to. So if you're signed in as your user, then the last element of the URL will show your network name, which is also going to be used when you add your credentials to the starter application. So we'll just go on to the getting hold of the starter application itself as well. And then we'll come back to using the admin back office as a way of kind of interacting with the application that you make. So the starter applications that we have made available so far are all built in PHP using the Symfony framework. So if you are a developer who doesn't want to build in PHP, then the starter applications won't be useful for you beyond just sort of seeing how a typical site might be structured, for example. So if you're looking to use Ruby on Rails or .NET or those other kinds of scripting languages, then by all means have a look at these starter applications which are in PHP, but they won't necessarily be useful for you in actually creating your own application. So they are web applications built in PHP Symfony. They are already connected to the Crowd Valley API using our software development kit for the PHP language. You can also get hold of the SDK directly from our GitHub page. So if you're interested in using the SDK and you want to build your own application but not using Symfony, using Laravel, for example, or some other PHP framework, then you can do that, and you can just take the SDK and build from there. But for the purposes of this webinar, we'll go through how to actually get hold of the PHP Symfony application and how to set it up. When we say connected to the Crowd Valley API, we actually mean that some functions on the web platform are already working, are already connected and hooked up. Some of the functions are listed here: the login function, the sign up function. There is a My Profile page, there is a My Wallet page, and there is some functions that show offerings, so featured offerings and live offerings. And I won't go into any more detail about what all of those features actually do. You can look those up on our API documentation page on our website if you want to kind of understand how featured offerings work, for example, how live offerings work, and what the difference is between those. But hopefully the kind of functionality should be fairly evident from the description. So logging in allows you to authenticate and log in as a user. Signing up means creating a new user and signing in as that user. And then My Profile shows your own information, your own account information once you're logged in as a user. My Wallet shows your online wallet balance and transaction history, and then offerings show details of opportunities to invest effectively. So they might be real estate offerings, or they might be peer-to-peer lending offerings, or they might be equity crowdfunding offerings, or they might be private placements. But the offering in general is the opportunity to invest for a user. And again, there are other webinars on our website which go into more detail about how those things work. As well as that, the web platforms, these starter applications, have lots of sample page layouts which are not connected to the API in the sense that they're not kind of functional. They don't call any particular function through the API, but they are added there for illustration, really, to show typical page layouts or typical kinds of processes that we see again and again on different types of platforms. We really provide them to help you think about what your own online process or your own workflow might look like. So, for example, we have a page which illustrates a typical kind of KYC, AML, or investor onboarding process, where you can see 3 or 4 steps, for example, where a user would first add some basic information about themselves, like their address and their date of birth. On the second step, they might be asked for a passport number or driving license number or tax ID number. And then on the third page, it might show the result of a online KYC check, which can be processed through our API. Since every platform is going to handle those things differently, and every platform will have their own preferred workflow, their own preferred process, we didn't implement or kind of prescribe any particular workflow or process on those pages, because we felt that developers would inevitably have to kind of undo or cut out the actual workflows, whatever we might have implemented. So we just leave the sample page layouts there, and then we allow developers to put together their own workflow, their own process based on their requirements and based on regulatory requirements and compliance requirements and so on. So everything starts with our GitHub account. The code for these sites is available at github.com/crowdvalley. So we'll just go through now how to actually get hold of that and how to set it up, how to install it. You can also see a live version of one of the starter applications at this link as well. So if you want to actually see what one of the starter applications looks like and kind of play around with it, you can go to starterapp.crowdvalley.com and you'll see this page here. And this is an identical site to the one that we'll go through now, that you can actually grab the code for and download and play around with yourself. So if you want to see what it looks like when it's kind of up and running, then you can go to that link. You can also log in and kind of play around with it there. So this is kind of some of the just to give a sense of what I meant there by the way that you kind of interact with it once you do get hold of it. If you see when you go to the link, the starter application link, when you log in as a demo account, and in fact the credentials are kind of hard coded in there so that you can log in with them easily, you can see some of the kind of built-in functions which are already available. So as soon as you log in, it will show you a welcome page saying thanks for logging in, and it will also show you some featured offerings. And then when you download the code later, which is what we'll go through in a second, you'll be able to see how that process works using the PHP code. So again, I won't spend too much time on kind of code level issues, but you can perhaps guess from some of the expressions there on the left hand side how some of this works. So logging in, for example, is using the login function, and then you have various other functions like getting your account, which is the get self function, and then getting your statistics, your stats, which is how the dividends received object is populated. So you can kind of easily compare those side by side when you get hold of your own version of the code and go from there. So in order to actually get hold of the code, you go to github.com/crowdvalley, and you'll see a number of different links. Some of them are not related to starter applications, like this first one on the list here, which is a service integration kit. This actually allows you to build in your own third-party services, your own APIs into a platform. So if you're interested in, for example, working with a local payment service or a local KYC or credit scoring API that isn't currently available through the Crowd Valley API, then you can build it in yourself and just submit it to us so that you can add it to your own applications. But then you'll see a couple of code repositories for the starter applications. So there are two that you can see here in this list. One is using what we call a San Francisco template, and another one is using a Mountain View template. And the site that I showed you just now is actually the Mountain View one, and that's the one that we'll go through now. So if you click on the link there, you click on the repository where it says PHP-starter app-Mountain View, you'll get to the page there, which also has a README file, and this is the start of the README file, and this actually explains quite a lot of what you have to do next that we'll go through now. So it starts by just making sure that you've got the code for this repository. That's step one. So you can clone that from GitHub and copy it to your local machine, your local environment. The second step is to get hold of Composer if you haven't already, which is a standard code library management service, and our application is set up to use the Composer system. So, and there are various equivalents in other languages, but this is a very common one for working with PHP Symfony applications. And then steps 3 and 4 are about how to add your credentials to your local version of this application. But we'll just go through this step by step as well. So once you're on this page, this is actually the same page, just scrolled up a little bit. There is a clone button on the right-hand side. So if you see where it is in green here, it says clone or download. And you can simply download the zip file, or you can also open in the GitHub desktop application if that's what you use. And this will no doubt be pretty familiar to most developers. Once you've downloaded it, then the next step is to add your credentials. So the only file that you need to change in order to do this is in the app/config folder. We've provided a template version of the application parameters file, which we've called parameters.yml.dist. And we've said in the README file that the first step you have to do is to copy this to parameters.yml. So effectively you're renaming it by removing the .dist at the end. And you keep it in the same folder, so it's still in app/config. And then the screenshot below is the entire file, the parameters file. So the location of this file is not necessarily always going to be the same. This is based on Symfony 2.6, I believe, and I'm pretty sure it is going to be in app/config all the way up to at least Symfony 3, and it may still be there after Symfony 3. But in any case, this is your kind of primary application parameters file, and this is kind of the only place you need to really mess around to get the application to run properly. So we've added a lot of parameters here in our template version, and in fact most of them are only really required because of how the Symfony framework is set up. So if you're going to be using this application to connect directly to your CrowdValley sandbox, so development environment, you don't need to do anything with the database driver, database host, database port, database name, all of those, database user, database password, all of those parameters. You don't need to worry about those at all. You can keep them as they are. Similarly, for the mailer configuration, those parameters are required by some elements of the Symfony framework. So mailer transport down to mailer password. You also don't need to worry about those. So if you're just looking to get something started and get up and running, you can leave those as they are, and the application will run perfectly fine without any changes there. The only thing you can't do is delete those parameters. So if you're kind of creating your own parameters.yml file, you'll still need to use all of those parameters there. Similarly, locale and secret, you don't need to change those as well. So those are also just there for reasons of the Symfony framework. So the secret actually is not used at all by the CrowdValley API, and it will just depend on what you want to do, if anything, outside of the scope of the CrowdValley API. So if you, for example, want to connect to some other services directly, or also if you want to set up your own kind of mail service or mail triggers, which are not using the CrowdValley system, then you can adjust those mailer services. Or if you want to connect to a local database for testing, or connect to other third-party service databases, then you can adjust those. But really the point of this process is to kind of get things up and running quickly, and from that point of view, you can just leave all of those parameters as they are. So the only ones that you need to change are the ones at the bottom, which are these four. And in fact, the first one, CV API endpoint, is already written in for you, which is api.sandbox.crowdvalley.com. And you don't need to change that then. So that's the link for accessing the Sandbox API, the development testing version of the API. And the other three are where you do need to enter your information. So if you recall back in the back office application, the admin portal, and also in the green box when you first signed up, you were given three pieces of information, which were the network name or application name, the API key, and the API secret. So you just need to enter those into the parameters file and save it as parameters.yml, and that's the only time you need to add your credentials to this application. So once you've done that, you go to the command line. So you find the folder where you have cloned or copied this application, and you would type in Composer install. So this is using the Composer library management service, which I mentioned earlier. And running Composer install just installs onto your local machine all of the libraries that are used by this application. It will install two libraries from CrowdValley, which are the authentication bundle, auth-bundle, and also our SDK. And if you want to have a look at that code, you can go into the vendors folder in the application after it's been installed, and you can see, for example, the functions that are available and the object types and the attributes that are available for objects. And then it will also install various other libraries that are used by this particular application, which we won't go into detail, but they, you can investigate those separately if you want to know a bit more about which libraries are used, and often they're kind of optional based on the type of application that you want to run. After that, you would run a command to install the assets for the application. So the assets meaning the images and the CSS files, the layout files, and the JavaScript files and the kind of front end pages which will be used by the application. So if you run this command, then it will install all of those into the web folder underneath your application directory. And then finally, you can run the application in server mode by typing in php apps/console and then server:/run, and you should see a message that says the server is running on this link, this 127.0.0.1, and that should be all you need to do to start the application running. There are various things that are not covered by these instructions, which will depend on which kind of machine you're running, which kind of development environment you're running. These examples were written up using a Mac, and if you're using a Windows machine or you're using Linux, they might look slightly different. You would need to make sure you're using you have installed PHP and then you've installed Symfony, and you just want to make sure your environment is sort of ready for use for a Symfony application. So I'm not going to go into all the different possible error codes that you might get, and if you really are struggling, then feel free to get in touch with us through our support channel, and we'll see if we can help. But there's such a kind of variety of different development environments, and also so many resources online about how to run Symfony applications and how to handle typical errors. So I since they're not directly related to our application, I won't go through those now, but this is kind of what the process should look like, at least. Then simply you can point your browser to this this link 127.0.0.1, which is basically a local machine link, your own machine link. And all being well, you should see your own local version of the same starter application that is also available at starterapp.crowdvalley.com. And to check that it's running, I mean, first of all, you should see this page, so it shouldn't show any kind of error message, or it shouldn't show a kind of page not found message or anything like that. It should go straight to this page, so that would show that the application is installed and configured and is actually running on your local machine. And then to check that the credentials that you have added are working correctly, you can try logging in as well. So if you go to the registration button in the menu at the top, then there is an option called which says login, and then you'll see a pop-up that says login at the top. And if you enter your same email and password that you entered right at the beginning when you were signing up for your credentials, it should allow you to log in straight away. So if you my user was called john.doe@gmail.com, and then I had the password password 123, I think. So I added that, press login, and then it will immediately go to the logged in page, and it should show you your name underneath welcome back, and that means that you are running the starter application on your local machine, but you're connected to the development accounts, the sandbox accounts that you set up, and you're now logged in as the user that you created when signing up. You're one user that's currently in your account. So just to kind of take it a little bit further, if you go back to the admin application, I can go through how you would create an offering and then how you can see that on your new application as well. And this is a kind of standard first thing that you might try out doing. You could also try other things like trying out the other functions that are already built in, like the the sign up function. So if you go back to the home page and log out and then use the sign up form on the home page, you should be able to sign up as a new user and then see that user in your back office. But you can also create offerings and see those on your application as well. So go back to the admin back office and go to organizations, which is in the community tab on the left hand side. Go to organizations and press the button in the top right called create organization or new organization, and you'll see this form, and you can create an organization which is the kind of the entity that is raising capital in our terminology. So I'll just got a screenshot of creating an organization called John's Widgets, and if you save that, then you'll end up in the organizations page, and it will say John's Widgets in the organizations list, and it will show you which date it was created, and it will have a unique identifier for that organization. And then as a second step, you can create an offering for this organization. So you would create that to provide the way for users to make an investment into John's Widgets. So for this step, you'd go to transactions on the left hand side and then offerings, and again you'd have another box called new offering, a button called new offering. Click on new offering, and then you'll get to this form, and you can say select the organization John's Widgets at the top. You can type in a name, so let's call it seed round, and a funding goal, which is the amount that you're raising. So you could enter $1 million, for example. And then there's a tick box at the bottom, which is where you can indicate whether the offering is to be featured or not, which is a way of kind of separating it out as a particular type or a special type of offering that you might want to show on a home page, for example. So in that example, you can click that it is featured, and you'll then see in the offerings list your new seed round with its funding goal of $1 million, and then you can also publish it straight away. So publishing it means that you would make it available on your front end. And in order to do that, you'd go to the action menu and click publish offering. So there's quite a few steps there, and I didn't want to spend too much time on kind of going through each one step by step, just because again there are other webinars available that show that in a bit more detail and also explain the difference between organizations and offerings and the offering kind of life cycle process and so on, and there's a lot more about that on our website. But briefly, you can kind of create an offering in that way, and then make it available to your application by publishing it. And once it has published status, then it can be retrieved and kind of shown on your front end. And then if you refresh the application, you should immediately see under the featured offerings page your new seed round. So this is actually on the home page, so you don't need to scroll around or navigate in order to find it. You would just go down to featured offerings, refresh the page, and you should immediately see the new offering that you've just created, the $1 million offering, and it says it's opening in 0 days because we didn't add an open date, but you can play around with that. You can do that in the admin back office. But that short process there has allowed you to add a new offering to your front end, adjust the information about it, adjust the name and the funding goal. And if you were to run this application on a public server somewhere, then this would kind of immediately make this available to your investor users who are accessing the site. And then after that, it's really a case of just kind of reviewing the code and adjusting what you want to show. So you might want to, for example, instead of showing the offering name, you might want to show the credit score, the kind of the bucket of a loan that this offering represents, for example. So in this case, you would look at the view file for the home page, which is the link up the top. So it's the public/index.html.twig file. And if you scroll down, it should be fairly sort of easy to read what's going on. You can see that you're in the right place because it has the featured offerings heading, the H2 heading, and then you can see that it's kind of looping through all of the offerings in your list of featured offerings. So all of the offerings you created in the back end, which you tagged or ticked as featured, will appear here. And then within that, you are showing a bit of information about that offering. So you're showing the offering name, and you're showing when it's opening, and its funding goal, and its description. And by adjusting this code, for example, changing name to credit score, for example, it might be something you want to do. If you save this file and then refresh the offerings, then it will show the credit score instead of the name. And again, this will be hopefully a fairly comfortable process for most developers. But you can just see that this is kind of already hooked up to the data model that the Crowd Valley framework is using. And you can then kind of play around with the data in your back office and see how it's presented in your application. So, I mean, typically you might also do things like changing the logos or changing the kind of marketing content on the homepage as a way to just get the site up and running fairly quickly, so that you can start showing people. You might want to cut out some pages that are available in the menu, and then you might also want to start kind of plugging in some other API functions from the SDK to your new application, and for that you could have a look at the vendors file, which shows you all of the Crowd Valley libraries, the SDK libraries and functionality libraries, and also take a look at our docs page, which shows our API information. So this would be a good place for you to kind of get a feel for what can be done in a digital finance platform based on the Crowd Valley framework and API. This link here, crowdvalley.com/API, has an exhaustive list of all of the public API functionality. It has several functions marked as starter functions, so those are the ones that we see typically as being the ones that developers want to get going, play around with first. So typically you would have view featured offerings, which is the one that we saw there, a process to verify a user's email address, a process to allow a user to say that they've forgotten their password. Further down, you've got the login as another starter kind of function, and then there's about 10 or 15 starter functions like that. And then there are many other functions which are also going to be very useful in many applications, but are perhaps take a few more steps. And also, if you scroll further down, you will be able to see the information about third-party service APIs that are also available through the Crowd Valley API, and it will show you all of the things that you can do through those services. So those are things like making card payments or making bank transfers, transferring money from user to user, running KYC checks or document scans for anti-money laundering purposes, and retrieving credit scores about companies or about individuals, or adding documents to deal rooms. All of those sorts of things you can investigate further. And then in the main area of the page, you've got the actual instructions for using each API. So a description of what each function does, how you should be using it, and then the response that you should expect back from our system. I'll also just point out that on the same page, on the right-hand side, there's a load of orange buttons which say run in Postman, and Postman is a really good application for interacting with APIs. We use it a lot internally to help our development process, and we found that a lot of developers who are working with our framework have found it quite useful to use Postman, especially in the early stages when they're just trying out different things and are trying to see how the basic data flows work from a front end to our system. So if you press that button, you'll be able to get hold of a file which shows all of the API functions that are available through our API. So all of the functions that are listed on this page, and you can use that then as a way to just add your credentials again and get started. Other resources for helping out at this stage. Our website is a good one, of course, to start with, because you have all of the API documentation. You have lots of developer guides about some of the key concepts that you need to get your head around for building these platforms. Documentation about our object models, our data models, and also a release history. So if you want to see about the new functions that have been released more recently, you can see all of the last releases going back all the way to the beginning of the year. You also have a lot of material about regulations, which is organized by country or by territory. So if you are really just getting started and trying to figure out what the regulations for marketing securities online look like in your area, then you can have a look there. And you can also get hold of other developers, other agencies who have got experience building these sorts of platforms for customers of ours, and you can also get in touch with us if you're looking for a developer partner to help you with building your platform. Webinar recordings are also available on our website as well, so after this webinar we'll also put the recording up on our website there, so if you do want to listen back to this or share it with anyone else, then you'll be able to see it there. Our GitHub account is where you go for all of our starter application code and our SDKs. So we have quite a few different starter applications using different templates, different page layouts. So you can find all of those there. Also have a look at fundingthemeshub.com, which is a site that was put together by some partners of ours, some development firms, who created some different front-end templates for these kinds of platforms. So those are not all starter applications, although some of them have been made into starter applications, but they are just front-end code, user interface code that you can download and use if you find them useful. And if you want to get hold of the code for any of those sites, then just let us know and we can help you get hold of that. Let me just see some of the questions that have come in. It's great to see so many. Actually, I'm not going to be able to get through everything, I think, in the last couple of minutes. But one question come in saying about the data fields. For the Crowd Valley data fields, should these be in quotation marks or not? I think you mean about the authentication header, I think. If that's true, then they should be in quotation marks, yes. So when you generate your authentication header, this is for using the API directly, it will print out a long string which has quotation marks around it, and you should keep those quotation marks when you're using using Postman, for example, to interact with the API. If you're not thinking about the authentication header, but thinking about the body of the requests, then again the quotation marks should be there. So, for example, when you're signing up as a new user, you would send the email and first name and last name, for example, in a kind of JSON format. If it wasn't either of those, then please just drop me a line afterwards, and I'll make sure I understand the question better. So you can reach me there at the email address on the screen, paul@crowdvalley.com. Another question come in about the Mountain View template. Do I need to add jQuery, Bootstrap, and other front-end files, or should it just run as it's seen on the screen? So the Mountain View template actually is already using jQuery and Bootstrap. So it has all of those files already set up in the code there. So Bootstrap, for anyone not familiar with it, is a kind of front-end framework that just allows you to make responsive websites, web user interfaces, so that when you view the page on a mobile screen, for example, it kind of snaps all of the different layouts nicely. And in fact, if you go to starterapp.crowdvalley.com to see that version of the Starter app, if you go there on a mobile or on a tablet, then it looks slightly different, and the way that it looks is governed by this Bootstrap framework. So you don't need to do anything extra to use jQuery and Bootstrap. Of course, you might want to use additional libraries depending on what you want to do with it. So you can, of course, feel free to add other libraries, other JavaScript services, and other frameworks, alternative frameworks, if you like. Of course, Bootstrap itself is optional as well. So if you don't want to use the Bootstrap framework, but you want to create your own, then of course you can do that. But we felt that for the purposes of just allowing people to get going quickly, it would be nice to have Bootstrap available. So we built this one with Bootstrap. In terms of timelines as well, we had one question from Lynn here. How long does it take to get the demo running up and running, as an example, in man days? So the idea of the Starter application is really that it should take no longer than the time that we spent today together, about an hour to get started. So obviously, I wasn't doing that live. I took screenshots beforehand and went through it, and that was just to make sure that the signal didn't drop and all of those things that typically happen on a live demo. But the process itself is no more complex than that. So you would simply go to the GitHub account, download the code, add your credentials, which takes sort of 5 minutes or so, and then run the application by setting up Composer, installing the libraries through Composer, and adding your credentials, running the application. It shouldn't take more than a day for someone who is certainly someone who's familiar with PHP Symfony, especially someone who's already worked with Symfony applications, who will already have a local development environment. It shouldn't take much more than that. The time in building one of these platforms is really in understanding what it has to do and then translating that into technical specifications that a developer can take and then build using our API. Of course, that's a bit more complex because you have so many other things to take into account, like regulations and compliance and the overall user experience. But in terms of technically getting one of these applications set up, it should be very quick. I think just time for one more question. Let me see. Yeah, there's a question here about the other Starter application. What are the differences between the Starter applications? So if you go to our GitHub account, you will see a handful of Starter applications there. There's the Mountain View theme, there's a San Francisco theme, I think there's a couple of others. The underlying code for using the API is exactly the same, so they're all using the same PHP SDK, which you can also get hold of on GitHub. The only difference is that the user interfaces are different. So the page layouts, the number of pages and the information on each page is different. they're really just different suggestions, if you like, different ideas that might help you think about what your own platform should look like. And you can, of course, download them all and play around with them, and you can kind of pick and choose different layouts. Each one has its own CSS file and JavaScript files and libraries and things like that. So it's not necessarily so straightforward to just swap pages in and out, but for any kind of capable developer, they would be able to see the different ideas, and hopefully that will help you get your platform set up as quickly as possible. We've reached the top of the hour. Thanks very much, everyone, for attending. I hope that was useful. If you have any further questions, please get in touch with me at paul@crowdvalley.com, and we will put the recording up on our website as soon as we can. And I think GoToWebinar also sends out some slides and information automatically afterwards as well, so you can look at those. Thanks very much for joining.